Okay, the year was 1972. I was working at an alarm company that I had worked for 4 summers, and I had run afoul of them a number of times. One rule they had was no motorcycles on the job, and of course I took a motorcycle to work one night and spilled it on the way out of the shop that evening. And they also had a hair length regulation, which for some reason they let me and one other person violate. I had hair down to my shoulders, and but they were always on our case about wearing hats. And so it was July, nice warm day, and I was working actually with the other one. They used to team us up, the two of us with long hair. I guess they thought if they put us together we wouldn't get into trouble or something. The important part about this story is I was going to get married in October. Not to Nora, to another woman. This is a long time ago. And so I was working, saving money for the impending wedding, and we were working in a place right on Commonwealth Avenue, a very ritzy, full single-family home, 4 stories, a butler who was watching over what we were doing so that we weren't soiling anything or getting in trouble. And part of my job was to drill a lot of holes, run a lot of wires and stuff like that, and the other guy was doing something else somewhere else. And so I was drilling a hole, and I had this big drill, and I was leaning in to make sure I wasn't going to damage this tapestry that was on the wall, and the butler was standing next to me watching me. And all of a sudden, I maybe turned my head, unfortunately, and the drill grabbed the bottom of the hair down here, and it immediately, I didn't take my finger off the trigger. It ran up to the top of my head and then fell to the ground. And for a second, I thought, what was that? And I looked down, and there was this drill that was totally encased in hair lying at my feet. And the guy who worked with me came running up, and he just gave me this totally astonished look. And I said, what? And there was this huge mirror in this hall where we were working. And I turned around, and I was, from this side on, I had hair down to my shoulder. On the other side of my head, I had about 100,000 little bleeding holes where all the hairs had been ripped out. My scalp was not damaged at all, but I had nothing but little tiny little holes with blood coming out of them. The fellow I worked with immediately got a cold cloth and put it on my head and rushed me over to Mass General. And so we're sitting in a very well equipped emergency room with people, not doctors or medical staff. So, you have to give them all the information. You're standing there with this sort of minor headache and wondering what's going to happen to your head. And they're asking for all the, identification and all this other stuff, and sit over there. And so we're waiting, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, a guy sits down next to me, and he was totally encased in plaster. He had just come off a construction job where a plaster hose had blown up, and he was head to toe covered in plaster, and all you could see was his eyes opening like this. So the two of us sat there. He was not very talkative. I was not very talkative, and we sat, and one at a time people would go in, and so finally we must have been there an hour and a half, and a doctor finally came out, and he took one look at me, he pulled off the cloth off my head, and he said, "It may grow back, it may not," and he put it back on. He looked at the other guy and he said, "Wash him up, he'll be okay." And that was the extent of our medical treatment that day. I had spent close to 2 hours at Mass General to be told it may grow back, it may not. And this other poor guy just got hosed down for trying to get the plaster off him. So after that, I must have met 10 women who, during the Second World War, when they worked in factories, either had their hair ripped out or knew somebody whose hair was ripped out. And for my wedding, a friend of mine who was a barber took all the hair that was on the left side of my head, and I had been cultivating this long hair for years, right? So now I've got this sort of Frank Sinatra do, and in some of the pictures when I'm dancing around, my hair flips up in the air, and you can see this shiny skin. So it was an interesting adventure, and I can say without a doubt, do not operate power tools that close to your head, ever. It's quite painful and embarrassing for months on end.